1999 Women's World Cup held in the USA was an unqualified success. Indeed, FIFA's president proclaimed that the future of football is female. International Olympic Committee. The International Olympic Committee, IOC, was formed in 1896 to govern the organization and development of what were understood to be a modern version of the Greek Olympic Games. Its first president was Dimitros Vikalis, a Greek, and its secretary was Frenchman Pierre de Coubertin. De Coubertin's energy and his vision have been the true inspiration behind the modern Olympic movement. The IOC has effectively governed the Olympic movement for over 100 years. However, that period of time has seen many conflicts and controversies within the IOC and in the Olympic movement as a whole. At first, the main obstacle de Coubertin faced to creating an international Olympic movement was the lack of organization of sport internationally. Early sports organizations, most of them amateur, had trouble organizing their own sports and leagues nationally. As a result, cooperating with the IOC internationally was an extreme challenge. In the early years, de Coubertin's own vision for the Games dictated much of the IOC's policies and procedures. His prejudices also influenced the movement. For example, de Coubertin was adamant in his rejection of female athletes' participation in the Games. An embodiment of Victorian ideals and prejudices, de Coubertin thought women's place was in the home and bearing and raising children. Indeed, he thought of women's competition as unnatural, immoral, and indecent. As a result of de Coubertin's powerful position within the IOC, it would take many years to have women participating in any significant way. The IOC has always claimed a hands-off approach to political struggles and controversies surrounding the Games, claiming, now for over 100 years, that the IOC is not a political organization and that the sport in its purest sense, one represented best by the IOC of course, is inherently non-political. The IOC has always had trouble answering critics who point out obvious exceptions to the claim. At the simplest level, the act of competing under national flags, something the IOC encourages, is a political event. At a higher political level, the Olympic Games have been used for political demonstrations through boycotts, and the Olympic movement was probably the most visible means of symbolically fighting the Cold War. The post-World War II years were lean ones for the Olympic movement. The IOC and hosting cities and nations often had trouble breaking even. At its worst, the Games went into great financial debt, most notoriously in the Summer Games in Montreal in 1976. However, since that time, the Games have taken a more market-friendly approach, encouraging private sponsorship and negotiating massive television contracts with networks around the world, especially those in the USA. As a result, the IOC is a much more financially solvent organization than it was a few decades ago. However, it is not clear that the IOC is following its founder's original plan for the movement. After all, de Coubertin was a pure amateur at heart. The current commercially oriented Olympics would make de Coubertin concerned, to say the least.
Earvin Magic Johnson. Earvin Magic Johnson is recognized as one of the best basketball players in the history of the sport. He will also be remembered as the first sports performer of international stature to declare openly that he had contracted the HIV virus. Magic Johnson was born in the state of Michigan and quickly rose to fame in the state by becoming an outstanding player for Michigan State. At 6'9", Magic was a formidable player. An enthusiastic sports reporter gave Magic the nickname to him during his high school years. During his college years, he developed a rivalry with another future National Basketball Association NBA superstar Larry Bird, then playing for the Indiana State basketball team. Their rivalry will become one of the main forces to generate interest in the NBA in the early 1980s. During his playing days in the NBA from 1979 to 1991, Johnson was named the league's most valuable player 3 times. He also became attractive to commercial advertisers during a period when it had become less taboo to use African-American athletes to endorse products. Johnson, however, was always guarded about his comments regarding racial issues. However, he was active in charity work and in general maintained a very positive light in the public's eye throughout his career. On announcing his retirement, Johnson stated that he had contracted the HIV virus from unprotected heterosexual sex. However, tales and rumors circulated in the press and in popular discourse about Johnson's sexual exploits during his days as an NBA superstar. Ironically, Johnson, upon retirement, became a spokesperson for safe sex. Another famous sports star, tennis player Martina Navratilova, criticized Johnson and pointed out that if the same comments had been made publicly by a female, she would have been labeled a slut. Navratilova probably made a good point. Not only was Johnson's public image a positive one, but also he was actively seen as a role model for heterosexual family life. The events and controversies surrounding Johnson's retirement probably raised his status as an athlete in the public eye, making his career that much more notable. There is little question, then, that the combination of incredible athletic prowess and the events surrounding his retirement will bestow among Magic Johnson a prestigious position in sports history. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is one of the most recognized sports figures in the world. To understand the breadth of his fame, it's probably best to think of Jordan in two senses, as a person and an athlete with incredible athletic prowess and skill, and as a cultural and media icon. The second way of thinking about Jordan is probably equal to the first. After all, it was his endorsement of dozens of commercial products, spots in movies, and in general, his commercially and market-produced image that made Jordan so famous worldwide. Jordan was born in 1963, one of three sons of a corporate executive. He attended North Carolina University from 1981 to 84 and was then drafted to the National Basketball Association's NBA Chicago Bulls. During the same year, he co-captained the USA basketball team to gold in the 1984 Summer Olympic Games in Los Angeles. Jordan's fame was quickly accelerated with the help of his agent at a marketing firm. After winning the NBA's Rookie of the Year distinction, Jordan quickly began signing a series of marketing contracts that would eventually create the iconic image known throughout the world. The most notable marketing endorsement contract came with Nike Corporation. Nike built much of its marketing and commercial strategy around Jordan in the 1980s and early 1990s. With his own line of Nike-produced basketball shoes and clothing, Jordan established himself as a marketable commodity. The relationship between Nike and Jordan would be a mutually beneficial one. It elevated Jordan to international prominence while helping push Nike to #1 status as world sports merchandisers. Jordan's athletic status was also aided by the fact that his was a career with relatively little controversy. Unlike many other superstar athletes, social and political controversies surrounding Jordan were rare, and when they did occur, these were minor. In 1992, he got himself into a bit of trouble when he did not allow his image to be used by the NBA for the licensing of leisure wear and memorabilia in the run-up to the Summer Olympic Games. In addition, once at the Games, Jordan, being contractually committed to Nike, refused to wear the official sponsor Reebok's warm-up suits. The issue was resolved when Jordan and his teammates wore the U.S. flag and extra-long lapels to cover the Reebok logo. In 1993, Jordan made a surprise announcement of his retirement from the NBA at the age of 30. He signed as a free agent to play Major League Baseball with the Chicago White Sox and played unsuccessfully, as it turned out, with the White Sox minor league affiliate. Jordan then made a brief comeback in the NBA, only to retire soon after. History will recognize Jordan not only for his athletic prowess, arguably the best the sport of basketball has ever seen, and for his iconic status in the later 20th century world of sports marketing and image production. Billie Jean King. During her competitive days, Billie Jean King was one of the most successful players in women's tennis. However, King is probably more recognized for her political support of women's tennis and her fight to achieve respect for lesbian and gay athletes in tennis and in sport in general. Born in Long Beach, California in 1943 as Billie Jean Moffitt, she began playing tennis at the age of 11. King learned the game playing on municipal courts rather than the route most successful players take in tennis in the private clubs. When King began competing in the elite levels of tennis, the sport was strictly amateur. She first entered Wimbledon in 1961, and only 2 years later, she advanced to the final. She won her first Wimbledon title in 1966 at the young age of 22. Her first place prize for winning was a $60 gift voucher for Harrods department store. By the end of her remarkable career, King would amass a remarkable 39 Grand Slam titles. Although women's tennis was amateur, King and a few other players began arguing for professional status. Indeed, King's competitive performances and training regimen took on a very professional tone. In fact, it was King and not men's player John McEnroe who started the practice of arguing against umpires' decisions on the court. Although it's the latter player who is better known for such antics. King's training and competitive practices made her a truly modern and professional player, but they also cost her much public support. King's major initiative was to start a professional tour, which began in 1968. Operating outside the auspices of the official tournaments and organizations, the new professional tour had trouble attracting many of the top international players. Interestingly, Wimbledon allowed professionals soon after King's tour started. The rest of the world's tours permitted professionals soon after. Among King's other major political initiatives, she aligned herself with the pro-abortion movement, Title IX legislation in the U.S., the purpose of which was to equalize girls' and women's funding and education, and she negotiated a deal with the Philip Morris Tobacco Company to set up the Virginia Slims Tour. Finally, the famous match between herself and self-styled male chauvinist pig Bobby Riggs in 1973, which King won, brought much public attention to King and to the growing women's athletic movement. Finally, in 1981, it was revealed that King had a lesbian relationship with her secretary. At first, King denied the allegation, but later she admitted to the relationship. Instead of hiding her sexuality, which is what female lesbian athletes have been doing for years, King was the first major sports superstar to come out. As such, King will be justifiably recognized as one of the first and most important fighters for the sexual rights of gays and lesbians in sport. Marathon. Few sports events integrate the competitive side of sport with the social and playful side of sport like marathon running. This might seem like a strange thing to say about what is such a rigorous and physically challenging event. However, major city marathons attract both serious competitors and less serious runners in the same event, and often generate a citywide party atmosphere leading up to and during the event. The competitive marathon was introduced as part of the modern Olympic Games in 1896. The purpose of the event was to mimic the ancient Greek Games, despite the fact that no such event was held in ancient Greece. However, according to legend, in 490 BC, a Greek soldier ran from Marathon to Athens to take news of a Greek military victory over the Persians. The runner collapsed with exhaustion and died. Interestingly, the first winner of the modern-day Olympic marathon in Athens, Greece, was Spiridon Lous, a Greek runner. As the 20th century unfolded, major track and field meets integrated the marathon into their schedules. However, the marathon grew in popularity due mostly to the emergence of several urban-based marathons. Some, notably the Boston Marathon, had been around for decades. However, many new ones emerged, especially in the 1970s and 1980s. The emergence of these popular races coincided with the late 20th century boom in sports and exercise industry. As a result, the sport of running took off. Also, lasting images from top international competitions began to attract people to marathon running. In the Olympic marathon in 1952, Emil Zatopek won the race after having competed and also won in the 5,000 and 10,000 meter races. In 1960 and 1964, Ethiopian Abibi Bikila won the marathon, making himself a national hero. Images of Bikila running barefoot in his first victory in 1960 are ingrained in most serious marathoners' minds. Women entered marathon running in the 1960s and 1970s, although their participation was met with great resistance. While women had run marathons for decades, the first recorded time came in 1926 by Violet Percy. It was Kathy Switzer's run in the 1967 Boston Marathon that was one of the most important symbolic runs for women. In the middle of the marathon, a Boston official spotted Switzer running and tried to yank her off the course. Switzer and fellow supporters resisted, and she went on to finish the race. Switzer's effort motivated other women to take on marathon running, and the participation rose, although slowly. It was not until 1984 that the women's marathon was included in the Olympic program. Today, major city marathons in Boston, New York, London, Berlin, and cities around the world make the race one of the most attractive, participatory, and spectator amateur sports events in the world. National Football League. The NFL, National Football League, is one of the wealthiest and most powerful sports organizations in the world. Many of the single franchises or teams are worth $200 to $300 million each. As such, each team should be thought of as a major corporation. American-style football, of which the NFL maintains a complete monopoly over the elite professional ranks, has its roots in English rugby, which was played in U.S. Eastern colleges and universities in the 19th century. However, rugby did not have features in keeping with American cultural norms, so U.S. football arose out of norms consistent with American society, such as clearly measured possession of territory and the expansion of frontiers through conquering new land. Walter Camp, a Yale player, devised the rules of the American game. In 1880, he introduced downs into the game, or breaks, so that teams could reassess their position and prepare for the next attack. This was in stark contrast to rugby's non-stop and more flowing play. This move would years later be crucial to the sport's success. With natural breaks in play, the game would be one conducive to American commercial television, which relies on advertisement breaks for the generation of revenue. Equally important was the later inclusion of the forward pass into the game. This made the game appear more offensive, and the famous Hail Mary long pass is to this day one of the most dramatic plays in sport. Football's success as a dominant American sport alongside baseball was secured in the 1960s with some important contracts with television networks. The ABC television network sponsored a rival American Football League to compete with the other dominant National Football League. ABC television did not hide the fact that the rival league was created for the sole purpose of creating more leverage with advertisers. After gaining greater legitimacy and earning more revenue, the upstart AFL was able to negotiate independently with other television networks and sign on big-name players. The most notable was star quarterback Joe Namath. With the AFL rising as a legitimate business competitor, the NFL and AFL negotiated a merger, resulting in the NFL League, as it is known to this day. Since the merger, the NFL has maintained almost a complete monopoly over American professional football. Football's success, then, has been a reflection of the ideals of American society and, more specifically, of American-style commercial enterprise. The league's success has in no small part been due to the relationship between the media and the sport. In a sense, football is a perfect example of a modern media-generated sport, successfully linking American norms and values with a sport tailor-made for commercial profit.
Jackie Robinson. On April 15, 1947, Jackie Robinson, 1919 to 1972, became the first African American to play in the Major League Baseball League. On that day, he started for the Brooklyn Dodgers. The so-called color line had existed in baseball and many other sports for decades in American sports, the complete segregation of whites and blacks into separate leagues and teams. There had been blacks in the sport of baseball for many years. In fact, in the 19th century, blacks had played alongside white players in several leagues in the U.S. However, an 1896 court case reinforced the segregation of baseball players according to the color of their skin. As a result, black players were excluded from Major League Baseball, relegated either to the position of mascot for the Major League team, or forced to organize their own loosely structured Negro teams. Robinson, the son of a sharecropper and grandson of a slave, excelled in several sports before serving in the U.S. Army. Initially a player in the Negro Leagues, Robinson played in a period when there was increasing support for breaking down the color barrier. The Brooklyn Dodgers manager took on Robinson mainly because Robinson was a solid player, not because he was interested in challenging the color barrier. Also, he felt it would increase attendance at the Brooklyn games, especially of African American fans. In 1946, Robinson went to Florida to play for the Montreal Royals, the Dodgers farm team. This move was risky on Robinson's part, as racism was still rampant in the U.S., especially in the South. In Florida, there were segregation laws that prohibited blacks and whites from sharing the same restaurants, hotels, and other public places, including the baseball field. Robinson was forced to stay in a coloreds-only hotel. It was believed that there would be a greater chance of Robinson being integrated into the minor league in the more liberal and open environment of Canada. Eventually, Robinson played his way into the Major League. However, the transition was not a smooth one. In the first year, he had many pitches thrown his way and was regularly taunted by fans and players. However, his season was a successful one, and he was voted Rookie of the Year. Robinson's Major League career lasted 10 years. Despite his initial success in breaking the color line in baseball, it would take many decades before there would be complete acceptance of black players. To this day, there is underrepresentation of blacks in management and coaching positions in baseball. Robinson died in 1972. His headstone bears an epitaph that he wrote, "A life is not important except in the impact that it has on other lives." Title 4. In 1972, the United States Congress passed Title IV of the Educational Amendments. This instituted a law that would seriously affect all U.S. educational institutions' sports programs. The law specified that it was unlawful to discriminate on the basis of sex in any federally funded educational program. This meant, among other things, that boys and girls and men's and women's sports programs would have to receive equal funding and support under the new law. The law was passed in a time when feminist-inspired movements in many countries around the world were fighting for equality for women.